All right. So my name is Mikel. I'm a language coach and consultant from the Basque country in Spain. And I help business people, entrepreneurs, professionals learn languages fast for professional purposes without wasting time. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing for a few years. And recently I've got more into YouTube as well. I've got a YouTube channel and I've got an online language learning platform as well. I'm a hyperpolyglot, but it's not a term I made up. There is actually an international association of hyperpolyglots, and they watched some of my videos and they invited me to join. So if they consider me worthy of being in the club, I guess I can call myself a hyperpolyglot. But there's nothing that special about it.
And so, can you talk a little bit more about that? How did you become a hyper polyglot? And also, what are your strongest languages, I guess?
Well, I guess the way everyone becomes a hyperpolyglot, right? You learn a foreign language and then you learn another one. And the more languages you learn, the thinner you spread. But also, once you get into languages, learning another one is always something that you end up doing and you've all been doing this as well, because it's just interesting, right? And there's always like you meet new people who speak another language. So you want to learn that one as well. And yeah, you learn language after language. And of course, not all of them at the same level, obviously. My best ones would be obviously Spanish, which is my second language. My native language is Basque, non-Indo-European language from here, from the Basque country. Probably the oldest language in Europe, and it's got completely different grammar and vocab from all the other languages. It's pretty interesting and very, very difficult to learn. So Spanish is the first one I learned. I would say I'm a native speaker of Spanish as well, though I don't speak it at home. Then there's French, which I'm not as good at speaking as I should because we live right in the border. I've been learning French forever, but it's the amount of people here south of the border who actually speak French well is relatively low, despite them being right there.
Really? Okay.
Um, yeah, really low. I had 4 years of classes in uni of French. I couldn't speak at all after 4 years of mostly grammar studying. And then I did a lot of, and this will explain a lot of my opinions later. But I did a lot of comprehensible input later with French because I thought, discovered that theory and I thought, okay, this might work. And I did probably 5,000 hours of reading, listening, etc. for years. I probably read over 100 books in French, seriously, and I still couldn't speak fluently after that. Of course, my vocab is really good. I understand, I can watch French TV all day and I understand everything, but I never really became fluent until I started deliberately working on my speaking skills, getting a lot of speaking practice either with people or on my own. No amount of input helped me. I mean, it helped me acquire vocabulary and improve comprehension, but that's it. So French, yeah, I'd say I'm pretty good at French, but not as good as I should. Then, of course, there's German. I've lived in Germany and Austria, both, which explains my accent a little bit as well, because more than a Spanish accent, I've got a weird mixture of like slight Arnold Schwarzenegger there because I lived in Austria.
Right. Right.
And yeah, my German's pretty good. Although I think it's getting worse now. It's deteriorating because
Hmm.
after living and working there for a couple of years, I barely get to speak it these days. And even if I try to read, I try to listen to it regularly. But if you don't speak it, it just like you lose your ability to speak that well. But yeah, my German's good. Portuguese, well, I speak fluent Portuguese. I use it all the time, by the way, so because I train jiu-jitsu and the coach is Portuguese, and I told them, okay,
Right.
we only speak Portuguese from now on. So Italian also pretty good. Romanian, I used to work there as well, believe it or not. And then a bunch of Slavic languages as well. These are tricky because that's the thing. Once you've learned one of them, you can learn a second one and a third one, and it look easy. And it's pretty easy to get to a decent level where you understand it and you can communicate. But they're also similar. That it also means that you end up mixing them up a lot and it gets confusing. There's also Dutch. I'm not very good at Dutch, but I can have conversations in it. Pretty easy to learn. Moroccan Arabic, believe it or not. I wouldn't say I'm fluent or anything. I mean, I'm in Spain, and there are lots of Moroccans here. I've been on Morocco as well. I've got friends. Yeah, I can have conversations, but not, I wouldn't say, I can't watch TV and understand or anything like that, but good enough to have decent conversations in it, right? I don't know how many of them are listed, honestly.
I don't even remember. Yeah, that's a lot of
I mean, there are also there are also a lot of languages, but that because of work or because of a specific trip I did like a sprint, a language sprint of a few weeks maybe to learn all the basics fast, learn to speak, and then never spoke again. So if I have to refresh them, it's there. Like I could, with some refreshment, I could get back to like speaking them a little bit, but yeah, they not fully. Like I wouldn't say I speak them. For example, this summer I spent a couple months working really hard on Greek because I went to the Greek islands, and I was having pretty good conversations there in Greek. But that was a month ago now, and I haven't used it at all. And I can speak. I still remember quite a lot, but in 6 months or a year, if I don't use it a lot, I don't really know how much of that I'll retain. And the thing is, once you've been learning this many languages, it gets hard to manage your time and focus and to maintain all of them.
So you talked about, all of the, I don't know if all of them, but a lot of the languages that you've learned, and I want to dig into sort of your techniques and how you've learned these languages. And the first thing I want to talk about is, I think a lot of people know you in this on YouTube because you call the, learn like a child approach. You call it terrible advice, and also comprehensible input. You call it quote unquote pure garbage. So that's from your videos. What do you could you justify this? Because I understand what you mean, but I think a lot of people, I can see the haters coming in the comments. So could you explain this a little bit?
It's pretty strong language now that I hear it from somewhere else. But the thing is, I was much nicer about it in the beginning. You recently made a video that was really good about comprehensible input.
Hmm.
My problems with it are pretty much the same. I'm not saying the comprehensible input is useless. Of course not. It's good. You should do it. You've had Paul Nation here before. I watched that. It was really interesting. My view on language learning aligns much more with his than with comprehensible input, mostly because I think comprehensible input alone, as a comprehensible input, is the only thing you need to learn a language. It's the only, it's like, I hear it all the time. It's not only the best way to learn, it's the only way to learn. And that's simply not true. So the reality of it is, if you try to learn a language from scratch just by watching videos, reading, listening, first of all, you don't have enough vocabulary to understand what you're reading, listening to, or watching. So you have to constantly stop and look up words, and it's going to be it's going to be a very slow way to acquire vocabulary in the beginning. So you're going to spend a lot of time watching or listening to or reading beginner content, and I'm talking about hundreds or even thousands of hours. And even after that, even if you learn, I don't know, the most common 5,000 words in a language, and you are doing lots and lots of input, yes, you will improve with it, but your speaking will not improve that much. You'll be able to form sentences after a lot of thinking. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe your pronunciation will be a disaster because you've never really practiced speaking. You've never got any feedback. Because it's one thing the way you perceive a sound in a foreign language, but if it's a sound that doesn't exist in your language, you'll often perceive it as a sound that does exist in your language, but it's different. Yeah, and if nobody tells you that, you'll keep pronouncing it the wrong way forever, unless somehow miraculously you figure it out on your own, but that's going to be unlikely. Other problems, yeah, grammar mistakes, vocabulary mistakes, mostly too when it comes to speaking. So yeah, vocabulary is the main problem. But you need to learn more words and you need to learn them faster, and input alone is very slow for that. But then at the later stages, when you understand the language, but you also want to speak it, if you're not getting specific, deliberate practice on speaking and doing a lot of live speaking practice, it's going to be very hard to speak it if you've simply been listening to the language or watching videos. And I talked about French earlier. Like we've got French TV stations here.
Uh-huh.
France is a half an hour drive away from here. I've been there many times. I buy books every time I go. I read the books in French about history and things like that, not like to learn French books. I been watching or listening to radio, TV in French for, I don't know, 15 years. And until I started doing deliberate practice, yeah, I could understand pretty much everything relatively easily after a few years. But still, like every time I went there or I met French people here, I wasn't really able to have a smooth conversation with them because
Right.
it was something completely different. I hadn't practiced that skill because speaking's a physical skill as well. Like it's not only knowing the grammar, knowing the words. Your mouth needs to be, it needs to have some practice pronouncing the sounds and forming sentences. And you need to form a whole sentence. A problem language learners often have in the beginner stages, especially, is to be able to think fast enough to form a sentence without like stopping mid sentence and struggling like to find words or like thinking of the grammar, all of that. But it's also pronunciation. Pronunciation is very different from uh, your native language. It's not only that you'll pronounce the wrong way, also that, but it's not only that. It's also that words will be so difficult to pronounce that you'll have to stop and slow down in the middle of the sentence for specific words, so you'll sound really broken and you'll be interrupting yourself all the time. So comprehensible input is great if you do it as part of a bigger system, but it doesn't. There are many problems that it doesn't help solve at all. So yeah, my problem is with all those people who promote it as the best and only way of learning, the only thing you should be doing, because it's misleading. And a lot of it comes from telling people what they want to hear, because it's very easy to tell people that they can learn a language by just watching stuff and not doing anything, like not really doing any work. And the reality of it is, um, any skill you want to develop, you need to do deliberate practice and you need feedback and you need hard work. There's no way around it. Getting thousands of hours of exposure, it's great if you do it as a side thing, but you need to work on your speaking skills and you need to deliberately learn vocabulary and you need to do a lot of things. And really important, you need feedback. If you don't get feedback, you're going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. These days, you could do it with a tutor, you could do it in classes. These days, you can do it with AI as well. Maybe not pronunciation, but grammar and vocal mistakes, definitely. Yeah, you need a balanced approach. That's why I spoke about Paul Nation earlier.
Mhm.
I think his like 4 strands approach, 25% input, 25% the deliberate studying of the language, 25% like meaning focused output. Like it's much more balanced and much more realistic. And I don't know how much a lot of these people promoting comprehensible input as the only way to learn. I don't know how much they themselves have used it to learn the languages, if they actually speak languages. I don't know. But I highly doubt anyone can get to a high level and speak well just by that. Like I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, I can tell you from my experience, just to give some of my own experience here, is, learning Japanese. The first year of just learning, I did, a bunch of stuff. I did some textbooks and so on, and a lot of comprehensible input. And, I made some okay progress, I guess, beginner sort of gains. But then as soon as I started specifically doing flashcards for, vocab, just, frequency lists, just using Anki. I mean, this is when I really started to see some gains in comprehension and just, speaking, because truth of the matter is, doesn't matter how much listening you do and stuff like that and reading. If you don't know the words, just you need to know the words, and flashcards or deliberately learning the words, that's the best way to learn them.
You do heavily use flashcards, right? I've heard you talk about flashcards a lot.
That's right.
And mnemonics.
Mnemonics, yeah, I do use them a lot. And actually, I want to talk about this, but just to finish on this idea of input, because I think it's worth talking about because, to be honest, I see the whole space, and I get it. Like, just read and listen, right? It's a seductive idea. It sounds great. That's just, and, you listen to all the Krashen videos, and he just sounds like a very, you know, he's just a great speaker. He's very convincing, right?
Yeah, is someone who speaks like you can't hate the guy
Yeah.
because he sounds like such a nice guy. So then, because what he's saying is appealing, then he must be right. That's the natural inclination.
Right.
But then, when you think about it and you see the results, and it's not really, no, it doesn't work.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's super efficient. It's turned into a bit of a religion at this point, comprehensible input on its own. And in my experience, it just doesn't work. I mean, it can work, I guess, but in terms of how time efficient it is, it's not good at all.
Yeah, and the other thing you asked about was the learn like a child thing, which you hear a lot as well these days, and also immersion, which is immersion can be interpreted many different ways, but what most people understand as immersion, being as doing a lot of comprehensible input and or moving to the country. And I get a lot of this, like people who just say, oh, just move to the country. Yeah, but there's nothing there in the air that will make you speak the language. You need to actually use the language. You need to be learning the language. If you move to Latin America and you are an English speaking expat there and you mostly work online in English and the people you hang out with are English speakers who are also there like you. How much Spanish are you actually practicing? Like it's so moving to the country as a system or as a method doesn't work. What works is moving to the country and then doing a lot of things in the language and using the language and learning deliberately and doing all the things that would work anyway if you didn't move to the country. So if moving to the country is going to motivate you more, great, but it's not where you are, it's what you do. And as for the learn like a child thing, when people say that, they normally use it as an argument in favor of comprehensible input. Like that's how you learn your native language. We all had tens of thousands of hours of comprehensible input in our native language. And we did, but first of all, we don't have tens of thousands of hours to spend listening to a language until you start speaking. We're adults, we've got things to do. Maybe 10 hours a day for years is doable for some people, but it's not doable for me. I've got other things to do as well, than most adults do as well. Like you don't have that much time. Also, children don't only do comprehensible inputs. Like they get thousands of hours of input, but also they get thousands of hours of trying to speak and getting corrected. And trying to speak again and getting corrected again, over and over again. So they're trying to speak and they're getting feedback. It's not like they just absorbing the language and eventually one day they go from zero to speaking the language. No, they speak badly for years with lots and lots of correction. And they also go to school and they read and write and do all of that. So it's not just learning like a child is one of those things that people say that sounds good, but it just doesn't mean anything. Like it's not. And there's a lot of debate of children are better, children are worse at learning languages, and neuroplasticity, this and that. I have no idea. I'm not a scientist, but yeah, it's a very different situation. They are very different circumstances, and it's not comparable. And just saying something that sounds good but it's not realistic, I mean, it's not really all that helpful.
Fair enough. I want to talk specifically about vocabulary now. I think a lot of people watching this channel have noticed that this is a it's a recurring theme, I guess. I believe that, vocabulary is the biggest problem, it's the biggest obstacle when learning a language. I'm a big fan of using flashcards. I mean, I've talked about it with Professor Paul Nation. I use Anki on a daily basis. I've created my own, Anki decks called the Anki Core decks. They're essentially huge decks of vocabulary following a frequency frequency sort of order based on depending on the language. And there's audio, there are example sentences, and importantly, there are mnemonics, which a lot of people I feel they just underestimate. I use mnemonics for a lot of words, and I feel like my retention has greatly improved. So AnkiCoreDex.com, I'm going to put the link in the description for people who are interested. My question here is, I noticed that for at least some of your viral videos, you've also emphasized a lot the importance of vocabulary. Could you sort of elaborate on this? Why do you think vocabulary is the most important aspect, and how would you go about learning vocabulary?
Why vocabulary is the most important thing? Basically because if you don't know the words, you cannot understand and you cannot speak. You can do as much input as you want, but if you don't know the words that they're using in the video or in whatever the article that you're reading, you will not have to stop and look up all the words, which means that it's really you have to spend a lot of time looking up words. And my idea of what you should do instead is looking up all the words before you watch the video or you listen to the podcast or you read the article or whatever you are doing for input. Because if you look up all the words before and you memorize them with mnemonics, then your first reading or watching of that piece of content will be much easier. So you'll be able to do a lot more of those. You'll be able to watch a lot more pieces of content in the same amount of time. And it's also just much more efficient this way. I think vocabulary is king. Like there's no, without vocab, you have nothing. You can have terrible grammar, but if you know the words, you communicate effectively and you'll understand more or less. Okay. If you study grammar, but you don't know one or two words that are key in the sentence, you don't understand the sentence. And of course, you can't say it if you don't know the words. You need to say something, but you don't know the specific noun that you want to ask for something, but you don't know the noun, or anything. Like if you don't know the verb, if you don't know the verbs and the nouns, you cannot say anything. So vocab is key, and for speaking as well, for both, for input and for speaking.
I think also you talk a lot about active recall.
Active recall, I use it to learn sentences and to improve fluency, to eliminate mistakes, to speak with more precision, and to just think faster when I'm speaking in a language. Because when it comes to fluency, one of the most important skills, the decisive skill, is being able to think fast enough what you want to say. You don't have to speak fast, but you have to think fast. Because if you're in front of native speakers and you have to say something, and especially if there are more than one, there are several people there and there's a conversation going. If you can't think fast enough of what you're going to say, the conversation will just keep going and you won't have a chance to speak. In front of a teacher, yeah, you'll be able to speak because they'll wait for you. But then again, that's what you're doing there. You're developing your ability to think faster and form sentences that are correct. That you need to do both, right? You need to think of the sentence. It needs to be correct, or as correct as possible. And also your mouth needs to be used to saying entire sentences correctly. So active recall is great for that, because if you do translations, for example, and I love doing translations, I guess you can do it with Anki flashcards as well. Yeah, flashcards are good. Space repetition is really good. Anything that's space repetition, I like. Personally, I don't use flashcards because I like to go fast with lots of new vocab per day, and the amount of flashcards to review per day ends up becoming overwhelming very quickly. So instead, what I do is create audio files and text of example sentences of the vocab, and I review by reading and listening to that vocab, and then by shadowing as well. Once I've listened to it a few times, I keep listening to it and I'll say it aloud when reviewing. And that means I'm practicing actively as well. If you review by listening, the advantage is that you can listen to it at any points during the day, so you can get a lot of reviews of the same words, of the same sentences easily, without taking too much time to just sit down and review flashcards. That's why I prefer using them over flashcards. But anyone who likes using flashcards, yeah, I think it's a good way as well.
Totally agree with you. I'm actually currently experimenting with this. What I've done is that, with my flashcards, being a software developer, of course, it helps. What I do is that I generate audio based on the flashcards that are due for me and so the way it happens is it's basically, active recall. But so I get, so either the sentence or the word in English said to me. So for example, I don't know, like a stupid example would be, okay, this is a cat. And then there's a 5-second pause to give me time to, as I'm driving in the car, which is, maybe I'm going to stop doing that because it get the dangerous, the harder the language is. But I get 5 seconds to recall what the translation of that is in Japanese typically. And I find this, this is hugely beneficial doing audio flashcards, audio repetitions, because the reps on Anki, it's really efficient, but at the same time it gets really boring, and you have to be sitting in front of a computer to do them. So 100% audio flashcards. Yeah,
So basically you're doing active recall while driving then?
that's right. I don't want to say just while driving, but while cleaning and doing that kind of stuff.
But yeah, you're doing active recall by listening. No, that's really good. I haven't figured out a way to create materials that allow me to do that well. Because I normally use text to speech and it's just sentence after sentence and there's no gaps between them. So it's good for repetitive listening, but not for, it doesn't give you time to think of the next sentence.
Right. And, of course, what I've done is a bit complicated if you're not a software developer. I guess, repetitive listening, that's also pretty good. Just get a lot of reps in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of getting a lot of reps of whatever you want to learn, but you need recall as well. If you don't practice, like you said, like being able, like if you don't practice thinking of the sentence and trying to say it in the language without just being fed
Mhm.
what you need to say, it's going to be hard to then think of what you need to say when you're in front of people if you've never practiced that skill before. So
Mm.
I think you need both a lot of repetitive listening, but also a lot of active recall. You need both.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to sort of tie this all together because we've talked a lot about vocabulary, about a comprehensible input, but there are lots of other things that people want to learn. Grammar, pronunciation. So if you had yourself and to learn a new language. Now, I don't know if there a language that you want to learn, a brand new language.
The answer is yes. At this point, I'm just learning bits and pieces of lots of different languages for a variety of reasons. Because I always have more trips to different places that I've booked. And also, I've got clients, one on one clients, who want me to learn with them. So they want to learn a language I don't speak. So I have to learn the basics with them. And I often do
Right.
several languages. I also create mnemonics for languages I'm not learning because people ask me to. So I'm just doing a lot of learning for a lot of different languages and not really focusing on a specific language.
I was trying to know if there is maybe a language that you haven't touched at all, to ask you then the question of, "Hey, look, if you had, let's say, a year to, so I'm just gonna take in a, I don't, so you don't know any Asian languages, I guess, so that would be a good, so let's say like Thai, for example, right?
If I were to learn Thai now from scratch, I would
Right.
close.
By the way, to give you more information, this is, you have 1 year, and the goal is to reach a level that is as high as possible, and it's just your full-time job, right?
It's my full time job. Okay.
Yeah, to learn Thai.
If I want to learn Thai in a year, I'd focus, of course, on vocab first. The most common 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 words.
Mhm.
And I'll write everything I want to be able to say, all the sentences I want to be able to say in every situation, all the normal interactions I want to have, all the topics I normally talk about or I want to talk about, everything I want to be able to do in Thailand. I write everything that I would say or everything I'll be asked or I think I'll be asked in those situations. And AI is really helpful for that. Write a massive list of sentences of everything that I want to say, translate it into Thai using AI. It'll be more or less accurate. Yeah, some people say it's not very accurate for some languages. It's good enough to learn the basics. And then create text to speech audio files of it using that text, that translation, and then take that translation and romanize it so I can actually read it. So I've got audio files and I've got the sentences I want to be able to say written in a way that I can read. Because trying to learn languages, a foreign language from scratch, when it's a completely different script that's very difficult to learn, you're adding another layer of difficulty there that it's going to make everything even harder. So it's completely unnecessary. If you want it for cultural reasons and it's interesting, and okay, I understand that, but if the goal is to speak, it's just unnecessary. You learn it later, maybe if you're really that interested. What I do is a massive list of sentences, actually two lists of sentences, one with everything I want to be able to say, and another one with all the common words
Mhm.
inside example sentences. So one's a list of it's a frequency list, a general frequency list, and the other one is my frequency list. Because my specific the specific things I want to say are not the things that maybe it doesn't coincide with the most common vocabulary in the language. A lot of them will, but there'll be a lot of words that are repeated, but there'll also be a lot of common words that are not included in my sentences. So I usually do both so that I cover all my bases. I've got like the things I want to say and also things that I'm likely to hear. And once I've got all of that, mnemonics. I go through the vocab, I start memorizing vocab. And every day I do like 30, 50, or 100 words, depending on how difficult it is. So the thing is with mnemonics is some languages, if they've got really weird pronunciation and really long words, it's harder to make mnemonics for them than others. Creating mnemonics for Polish, for example, because pronunciation is quite tricky and spelling's tricky.
Right.
Mnemonics for some other languages, pretty simple. So, but yeah, I create mnemonics anyway, and then lots of reviewing. So those sentences I start with my own. I call those the language islands, my language islands. The list of sentences of everything I want to be able to say. After memorizing the vocab for that day, I read and listen. So first read while listening 2 or 3 times, the whole list. First checking the meaning, then without checking the meaning, once I understand it. And then eventually just listen without reading. And then also listen and shadow. So listen and repeat simultaneously over and over again. I do that with those sentences as many times as necessary until I can say them relatively well and I understand them easily. And 1,000 sentences like that, which 1,000 sentences is pretty good. You can have decent conversations with, if they are good sentences, of course. That's an hour of audio. So you can review it 10, 20 times a week if you want. And after a certain amount of reviews, it'll just be easy to understand at least. Then you have to also use it, right? But I do a lot of reviewing with those sentences and then I start doing active recall. So I'd continue listening to them to learn the pronunciation really well. And it's an easy way to review, right? But I also start doing active recall. So I take them, bring them to ChatGPT and tell ChatGPT to feed me those sentences in English and then correct my Thai, my phonetically written Thai, give me feedback on this, not the spelling, but the grammar and vocabulary mostly, only.
Sure.
So I'd get sentence after sentence in English for me to translate. And I'd say it aloud while translating. And I keep doing that with my list of 1,000-ish sentences. And once I knew those well, I'd move on to the other list, which is the most common words in the language, the frequency list. 1,000 most common words in example sentences, the next 1,000, and I keep doing that. This alone should be enough to, in a few months, to have a decent understanding of the language and to be able to say quite a lot. And then it's just a matter of continuing to do this with more and more sentences. And then it just keeps getting easier because if you know the most common words and you've learned the grammar by learning sentences, the next batch of sentences is going to be much easier because you know a lot of it already. And once I knew, like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 words in the language, the most common ones, and enough of my own sentences to communicate relatively effectively without too much hesitation, I'd start speaking to native speakers and listening to native speaker podcasts, things like that. So just move on to real life content. And that's the way I do it. All of this sounds like a lot of hard work, and that's because it is. None of this is particularly fun, except the listening to native speakers, talking to native speakers and listening to native speaker podcast parts. That's interesting. But in order to be able to do that effectively, you need to do a lot of learning first, especially if it's a difficult language. So long story short, lots of mnemonics, lots of reviewing with example sentences, repeating things aloud a lot, and doing active recall with feedback over and over until I'm able to say it. That's how I'd learn
Right.
a language from scratch.
And specifically, yeah, so in the case of Thai, so if you had a year, how many words and how many sentences do you think you would have at the end of the 1 year?
That's the thing. And a lot of people ask me about this. People who want me to help them design a learning plan to learn a language full time. The problem with learning full time is that it's not about time, it's about energy, I think. I don't know if you've ever tried learning like a language full time, but what ends up happening, I don't know if this was your experience, is that you don't have 10 or 12 hours a day of the most effective kind of learning exercise. Like you maybe have 2 or 3 hours a day of active recall and vocabulary maximum. You cannot do it like, you cannot do 12 hours of flashcards a day, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you can. I can't at least. Most people can't.
No way I can. I mean, after just 1 hour is like, for me, I just start to burn out after an
Yeah,
hour already.
that's
So hard.
and then the same thing with active recall because translating into the language is really effective, but you cannot do it all day. So my advice to those of you who are doing it full time is to manage your energy more than your time. So what I like to do is sandwiching. So I categorize different exercises into like intensive and energy intensive and non-energy intensive exercises. So input would be like low effort, active recall or memorizing vocab with mnemonics would be high effort. So what I like to do is sandwiching them. So I do a high effort one, I memorize vocab, then do some input, then do some active recall, then we can take a quick break, short break, and do mnemonics, input, recall, or something like that. But then take frequent breaks as well. But always start with the least appealing or the exercises that are the most hard work, And the moment you start getting tired of it, stop there and move on to just listening. Go for a walk. Well, go for a walk and listen, and take a short break, whatever, and then go back to the moment you start getting like motivated again. You recover your energy. You go back to doing the like intensive stuff. That's the way I do it. And again, making sure that you're not burning out, because it can happen.
Yeah, for sure. Mikel, this has been really great. We're reaching the end of this interview. Where can people find you? I mean, there's your YouTube channel, of course. I'm going to link to that, but I think you have a website. You do have some courses or stuff that people can look into?
Yeah, I've got a 30-day free challenge to improve your speaking skills as fast as possible. It is not for everyone. It's pretty brutal, but yeah, you can try that if you want. There's a link all over my YouTube channel, Mikel Hyperpolyglot. That's it. You can find me there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming today. And for all of the listeners, I'm going to put all of the links in the description of this video, and also my own vocabulary decks and my website and so on. So thank you so much, and see you in the next interview.